Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Barzyk, founder of Wise Investigator, where we help faculty get their research funded. Today, I sat down with Dr. Ralph Anthenien, who previously served as a program manager at the U.S. Army Research Office. This is one of those interviews you'll want to watch all the way through if you're serious about getting funded, because Ralph doesn't just talk about writing a proposal, he explains how funding decisions actually work behind the scenes. So we covered the proposal life cycle from the first outreach email all the way through what happens after you're funded. And we're going to talk about how to contact program managers in a way that leads to real conversations, what to do when you don't get a response, and the most common proposal pitfalls like budget surprises, missing key sections, or drifting off scope after months of coordination. So, Dr. Ralph Anthenien spent over 18 years as a program manager at the U.S. Army Research Office, leading propulsion and energetics portfolios, including coordinating and leading MURI and STTR efforts and supporting fundamental research tied to organizations, including DARPA. He's also worked across the Air Force Research Enterprise. Ralph holds BS, MS, and PhD degrees in mechanical engineering from UC Berkeley. So let's get started. So, when you were a program manager, what were you actually trying to accomplish in that role?
So the main objective is trying to collect good ideas. So I was a program manager in the area of fundamental research, basic research. So we're really looking where I was, we were really looking at the science. Depending on where you're at, other program managers in the applied or technology field may be trying to develop a new widget, new technology, new technological process. But where I was situated, I really wanted that novel idea that would overcome some kind of scientific challenge that allowed us to investigate, discover new materials, new processes, new ways to characterize these new types of materials or investigate the reacting systems other than combustion energetics. So we're looking, chemical reacting systems and high energy, high temperature, very rapid processes, which was a characterization challenge. But it was that scientific idea that I was really after.
Okay. And to get right to the point here, we're going to be talking for a little while, but if somebody doesn't watch the whole video, could you tell us if a faculty member were to remember just one thing about getting funded, what would that be?
Coordinate and communicate with your program manager. I saw almost no proposals that came in cold, meaning no prior communication, no prior coordination. Be successful. So that key was talking to your program manager. I realized it, from where we sat, even we had a lot of money, we had a lot of apparent authority, if not real authority. It could be kind of intimidating, but they have to get over it. They have to reach out, start that conversation with that program manager.
Thanks. So, to take a step back, then, could you walk us through the life cycle of a proposal from the idea to after it's funded?
Sure. It's a long process. It may be a bit of a long answer. But hopefully, the future principal investigator, the proposal, comes up with an idea, however it is, sitting in a listening to a technical talk, whatever. Hey, I've got an idea for this to overcome this challenge. Something is hard, probing a high pressure, high temperature reacting system like a diesel ignition event just prior to ignition. It's optically inaccessible. They come up with a new idea to probe the chemistry, what's reacting in there. The first step is to communicate that idea, and that involves reaching out to a program manager at some funding agency that may have interest in that type of physical system, chemical system, whatever discipline they're involved in, and communicate that idea. And it becomes important for them to communicate both what they're trying to do and why it's hard to do, why somebody hasn't already done it, as compared to the current state of the art system. Um, they also have to be flexible about when they're communicating that idea, because they may be convinced that this is the right program manager at the right agency, There may be various reasons, either that program doesn't have sufficient dollars bandwidth at the moment to fund another idea. It may not be exactly on target of what's most important, even though that idea is contained within the broader discipline of that program manager. Or it may just not be the right agency entirely. That, hey, that agency's getting out of this business, that program's closing. Programs are a dynamic thing. But reaching out and being flexible, part of being flexible is communicating not just that idea, but what we like to communicate back is a research menu of ideas. So I have a new idea. I also have a few others that may be applicable to your program. And that's something that first communication should entail from the PI to their potential PM, is that I'd like to talk to you. I have an idea, but I have several others that may interest you as well. Can we set up a time to talk? Um, Program managers are people. We all have our own personalities. Some folks like to talk on the phone. Some prefer a Zoom call. Some prefer an in-person meeting. I prefer email. So what I would send back when I got that first communication, be via either a phone call, a contact at a meeting, or an email, was exactly that. I'd say, send me an email that has a research menu on it. It's very short, usually 2 pages in total, but has 3 or 4 different ideas. One of them's wild and off, what you think may be off base from what I want, or pretty wild technologically or scientifically. But give me a couple different ideas of some things you might want to do. Tell me what you want to do, why it's hard, and what's your new approach to overcome that technical challenge. Then the conversation is started, because I would read through these ideas, go back to the PI, say, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about these other 2 ideas? And it's a back and forth as we zero in on what we would be the core idea of a future proposal. Usually at that point, I would invite a white paper, which again is short, but it has more detail, because now it's around just one idea and maybe 4 pages. But the central theme is the same. In that white paper, I'd want to know, what are you trying to do, why it's hard, why can you do it now, what's the new enabling thing that allows this idea to come to fruition, what's kind of the result or impact, and what's the approach that you'll follow to get to your end objective. And then scope too. How long is it going to take? How much it's going to cost? How many grad students are going to be involved, and so on. Those are just short little one-liners. 3 years, $200K a year type thing. And then we go back and forth on the white paper as we refine that idea and the scope. I may come back and say, hey, I don't have that much money. I have this much money. If we cut part of this out or lengthen it over a little bit of time, can we work it? It's a conversation. It's not just a fire and forget from the PI. Here's the white paper, take it or leave it. It's very much of an evolving of an idea. Once we have that idea squared away, and the PM is happy with the idea the PI is proposing, the PI says, yeah, I understand. This is what I'm going to give you if you fund this. At that point, we would encourage a full proposal. And we go through this long, drawn-out conversation that, from first idea up to this point of encouraging a proposal, could take not just many weeks, but many months as we go back and forth, because we want to get it right. Because once that proposal is written, we really can't change it. We've lost the flexibility. We've put it in concrete with this idea. Who's involved? How much will it cost? So they'll write a proposal, submit it through their agents, through their school up to the agency. And then we'll get it reviewed. Where I was at the Army Research Office, this was typically a panel of at least 3 academics, and then another person in research with the Army, somewhere across the Army. They'll give feedback on it. One of the nice things about the Army Research Office when I worked there was we weren't bound by those review recommendations. So someone could recommend decline the proposal. We'd read why they wanted it declined, and we could overlook that recommendation of decline and still fund it. Now, if the decline was, this has been done previously, or it's technologically impossible and here's why, obviously we wouldn't fund it in that case. But in the cases where it would be a recommend of decline, no one's ever done this before, there's no reason to think they can do it. As long as the person had proposed a sensible and reasonable path to achieve it, I would actually look at that as a positive review, because where I was in fundamental research, we were looking at being that cutting edge of scientific exploration, and having a reviewer say this has never been done before, to me, was a good reason to fund it. So once we get all the reviews back, we'd make a decision on whether or not to fund it based on the technical merit, where it fit in the program, and the availability of funds. Um, we'd make a recommendation up to our leadership to fund it. Obviously, if it was all recommendation of accepts, it was easier to get through, but we could write justifications as to why to fund it, even if it was recommendation of one or two recommendations of declines. Leadership would sign off on it. It'll go down to contracting office. They'll go back to the school, the sponsored program office, and start the negotiation with the school to get everything signed and get it on grant. And then we start the actual funded portion of the program, where now the researcher is doing the work. And with the Army, it wasn't a fund and forget. We would stay involved with that researcher, contact them frequently, several times a year, go out and visit their lab, talk to their grad students, look at what they're doing in the lab, have them present to us at least once a year on current progress, so that we kept abreast of what was going on. And then as the research evolved, we could change direction of it. If one of the approaches ended up being a dead end, we could take an alternate approach, try and still achieve the objective, and then decide whether or not we wanted to encourage for a follow-on proposal, go a different direction, or just decide that that idea didn't pan out, and we're going to end it here. And sometimes that was the right thing, right? It was fundamental research. We're doing things that had never been done before. Not everything worked, and finding those dead ends is just as important as finding the paths to success too, because then we know that there, that way is a dead end. Let's not waste any more effort in that way. But that's kind of a quick overview of the beginning to end of a funded proposal.
Thank you. Then, could you give us an example of a story with either anonymized details, or maybe you could just tell us a hypothetical type story
Mhm.
based on your experience of a time that a proposal was supported, when maybe it had a rocky start, or maybe that proposal wasn't perfect? You mentioned some declines that could come in the evaluation process, but could you give us an idea of what it might look like to get something through, even if the process doesn't look from the outside to go perfectly?
So I can think of one. It took about two or three tries through the proposal process, where we did go through that whole idea phase, white paper phase, and it was when I say it took weeks or months. In this case, it probably took over a year to get the proposal, because I wasn't convinced that the technology they were proposing was feasible. I became convinced. We got a proposal in. The proposal reviewers also weren't convinced, and raised several not viable, but several reasonable objections to why this might not be feasible. In that case, we did decline the proposal, but we make a habit of success or failure. We would always give back to the PI all the reviews, so they could see the criticisms, and even if it was successful, they could take that into consideration as they move forward through the research to try and make it better. Um, and if it's a decline, they can take it into consideration if they want to repropose. In this case, it took a few times through that, where they took the criticisms and the feedback from the reviewers, made the next proposal better, and finally, uh, we got to a place where reviewers and I, as a program manager, were satisfied that this was now a viable approach, to a new characterization technique of in situ impact of metal particles as they impacted a wall, and would begin to ignite. Um, it ended up being a very successful method in the end. It took a lot of effort to get there, but I'd like to think that I'm sure the PI was frustrated by the multiple rounds of proposal, but I think we got to a better approach, and it ended up being quite a good success in terms of the characterization method. I was very pleased with the final results of the effort.
Right. Well, now we could move into talking a little bit about some mistakes or misconceptions that PIs might have about the process. So, in your experience, what were some of the most common mistakes that PIs could make when they were engaging with this process, either from the first approach or in the proposal writing process or anywhere along there?
Um, so in terms of first approach, I mentioned one where, you just turn in a cold proposal. You haven't coordinated anything. It's awfully often going to be off target and out of scope when you do that. And it's a proposal. It's still a lot of work for that PI to put it together, but it stands almost no chance of success in that case because it just misses the mark. Um, for early career PIs, a common mistake I saw was trying to continue the efforts they had done as a graduate student, basically continue their advisor's research. I would always look for these folks to go in a new direction, and I would advise them of that. Hey, I'd often fund that professor, sometimes not always. Like, look, I've got an expert doing this work already. I don't have all kinds of money. I can't afford to fund two experts doing basically the same type of work. Give me a new idea. So don't expect just to keep doing what you're doing as a graduate student. Um, I think that pretty those are the two most common things I saw for first contact. Oh, and then one other thing was I mentioned we can spend weeks, sometimes months, doing the back and forth with the white paper, from the research menu, finding the idea, narrowing down, refining the white paper. And you think you got it lying flat, and then the PI would turn in the proposal and be kind of back to the very first idea that was off target, out of scope, and misses where they're very excited about this first idea. We did all this coordination, and they kind of snap back to that first idea and ignore all that coordination and communication. And it's hard to fund in that case because again, it's out of scope and off target. So pay attention to all that feedback and don't discount all that work that you just did. It's an easy trap to fall
Yeah,
into, right?
and I think it's not foolproof, but making sure that you're in agreement on paper, right? Because if you have a conversation
Yes.
and "Oh, I think I understand what you're saying. You think you understand what I'm saying." It's nobody's necessarily right or wrong, but when you get it on paper and you can both look at that same piece of paper and agree that this
Yes.
makes sense, I
And that's part of the
it's
reason I prefer to do most of my communication by email was,
Mhm. Yeah.
it's harder to be mistaken, or you can clarify further, and you've got a traceable record. Or even if you prefer to speak by phone, a follow-up email that immortalizes the conversation is always a good idea. Here's what I understood we agreed to. Can you confirm before you go off and do all that work?
Yeah, so I was gonna ask about a mismatch between what the funder needed and what was in the proposal, and it seems like we already started talking about that a little, maybe a different idea, but is there anything else that when you would look at a proposal and you would see a mismatch between what you needed to provide through your program and what the strategy or areas of emphasis, from the proposer?
One of the more commons things I saw, I think I understand your question. We'd go through the process, white paper and all that, and when we get the final proposal, it might be double the cost. And we
Mm.
look into what happened, and they'd say, "Well, I added a co-PI on that I needed to help me with the work." Well, I understand I've got two of you now, but my bucket of money didn't get any bigger. So now you're taking twice as much money from my program, and I only have so much to spread out. So that was one of the common ones. The other common ones, and I kind of learned as I saw more earlier in my career because I didn't know to ask the question, but making sure that the PI has the necessary equipment to conduct the research. So if it's an experimental, do they have the right characterization equipment, be it a TGA or DSC or TEM or whatever these different equipments are to do the characterization. Or are they expecting that that first year they'll buy it and all of a sudden, there's this extra $250,000 tacked on to the proposal, or they assume they'll get a DURA to fund it that first year, and that's some of that conversation that had to take place. Usually, the proposal is listing all the facilities, and that might be where you catch it. It's like, wait a minute, they don't have this equipment available to them. How are they actually going to get this done? So I learned going in, make sure to ask the question: are you going to need any other equipment to do this? And then we could start that coordination of, okay, my DURIP's full this year. We can look at it next year. Maybe we delay you submitting a proposal next a year so we can make sure we get you the equipment and you can hit the ground running. So those were some of the common pitfalls I saw.
Okay. Yeah, and then if we're thinking a bit about how a PI might try to determine if a program is a good fit for them, that kind of can relate to the outreach that they need to do when they're making first contact or trying to make contact with a program manager or program officer. So, if they send that email with a couple ideas or a research menu or even just an introduction and they don't get a response, how should they decide what should inform their decision? Do I follow up? How many times do I follow up? Or maybe I should take this as a message that this idea is not a fit for the program. Could you give somebody in that situation some guidance?
So be persistent. It's hard, but be persistent, but be persistent in a reasonable way. So don't wait one day and then follow up with another email. So these PMs are frequently on travel. So they're away from their desk. I know we all have iPhones now and laptops that can connect, but it's just, you're usually at a meeting and your job is to be at that meeting. So by the time you get back to the office, it may have been a few days since you had time to go in depth on your email and really answer some of these. So I'd usually recommend, giving about 5 business days before you follow up. And then you reply and, hey, I'm just following up. I'd like to have a conversation. I have some ideas, find out if it's a fit, and do that on that 5 to 8 business day scale about 3 or 4 times. So it's over 6 weeks or so. And the person might be on vacation too, right? So they're out for 2 weeks. And if they're being responsible family members, they're hopefully not checking their email all the time. So keep that understanding in your head when you're getting frustrated that you may not be getting a response, but be persistent. After about the fourth or fifth non-answer, it could be that that person has moved on, retired, and they just haven't retired the email yet, or they're not that program manager anymore. You can reach out to the organization, try and reach into the agency, and see if you're aiming for the right person. Make sure you're using the most current version of the funding opportunity. I talked with someone a while back, and they were very frustrated they couldn't get a hold of someone. I was like, well, that person hasn't been here in years. Where are you getting this information? They were using a BAA that was about 4 years old and hadn't downloaded the most current one. And once we got them to the right person, they got an answer back pretty fast. And just that email, hadn't been closed out by the agency, so they didn't get a bounce or a response, but it was just going into a black hole essentially. So be aware of those types of things, and don't be sequential in how you're reaching out for your ideas. There's usually multiple agencies that could be responsive to your idea. Reach out to all of them at the same time. Don't wait to hear back, certain from someone that this is or this isn't a good idea for our agency. Reach out to the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, NSF, all these other agencies in parallel. And if multiple agencies say this is a great idea, just let those program managers know. Sometimes they have the ability to share funding, share financial load, and you can actually increase your chances of getting funded because now you just cut each one's cost in half through that sharing of funding. So there are some ways to do that. It's not a guarantee, but you can let them know, hey, this other person responded. They're also interested. Let me know what your preferred path forward is on this. That's a good news problem that can be worked through. But
Great. So, if we could think a little bit about the proposal document itself, what is one section that stands out to you as routinely problematic? Maybe something the PI overlooks or something that they don't put enough effort on or realize the importance of?
it depends on the funding opportunity, but two of the areas I often see, almost all of them ask for facilities, facilities and past performance, past experience of the investigators. That's an important piece because the PI and the PM have hopefully had this conversation, are pretty familiar, but the other reviewers aren't, and they may not know. So don't gloss over that facility and ability to conduct the research section, however it's titled. The other one that gets glossed over frequently is the outreach section. What have you done? Especially there are some that require it as input, and it can be phrased in different ways, either outreach to K to 8 or like an example, DURIP. One of the required entries is how is this going to impact the educational ability of the institute. So, you're not just going to use that microscope in your lab, but it's going to be part of the curriculum in other classes. And how is that going to happen? That gets glossed over frequently, and basically you're just giving away points by not addressing that, because it is a reviewed, a graded part of the proposal process.
Okay. And so if somebody related to that, if someone is proposing to a mission-driven funder like a DoD organization, and perhaps they don't feel that they have great knowledge of exactly what those defense applications could be. Maybe they've had some conversations with a program manager, but they don't feel like they have deep experience there. How would you suggest that they approach developing that section when they're writing the proposal to make it as strong as possible, understanding that they're not, maybe haven't worked with the defense community before or don't have experience themselves with the military?
Sure, and it depends a lot on what level of research you're applying to. So like at Army Research Office, we dealt with fundamental research, basic scientific research. And we didn't look really hard at the widget they were trying to make, the application, but we wanted to understand that it could enable new technologies. And writing it that way, that, hey, if we discover this new material, if we discover this new characterization method, it'll give us a path towards enabling these more advanced technologies, these more advanced processes. If you're applying at the applied or the system level, obviously you're going to have to be able to address certain metrics. Like we're gonna make this smaller, lighter, faster, cheaper, whatever the metric you're looking at. If it's an applied, it's applied. But one of the best resource is that person you're talking to, that program manager, and just be honest with them. Say, I'm not as familiar with the DoD. I need help making this proposal successful. What is your vision as the program manager as to where this new science, this new physics, this new application may go and what it may enable? And then just echo that back in that proposal, in that section. But that is one of the sections I overlooked in the previous question to me, that can get overlooked in terms of what's the impact of this research is successful. Where does it go? And how you frame that depends on where in the research realm, the level of funding, basic, applied, systematic, you're proposing to. So it's either you're enabling or you're actually building the widget.
So if someone is doing basic research and they hear about transitions, what does that mean exactly? Because we can often hear that word transition, but what does that mean to you?
So transition is moving up a level of research. So the way the government funds it, we call it 6.1, 6.2, 6.3 research, which is basic, applied, and developmental. So you're trying to discover a new material. You're trying to discover how the new material might react in a device, and then developmental, you're actually brass boarding it or on a table to make the new device and demonstrate it. And as we learn more about these materials, how they behave, we can advance them up to the point of actually getting it in a functioning system. And that's that transition, is that steady progress, steady movement from idea, science, pure physics, up to something that's in a for the DoD, something that's actually in a weapon system, held by a soldier or an airman or a sailor. and there's a lot in between that goes in there, and that each level is a transition.
So that could look like, what would that look like in terms of what the PI, university PI might produce? And how would they kind of hand that off, or how would they demonstrate that there has been a transition?
So the PI usually isn't responsible for the transition. That's usually a PM function. The PI is responsible for doing whatever research they promise to do. The PM in coordination with researchers at a laboratory or with a program executive office at whatever agency they're at, usually is the one who is pushing that transition. The PI may get requests for information in terms of, some of the metrics, when it may be ready, how it's performing, what the characterization results are, and so on. But they're not the responsible parties for making those transitions happen. That's at the agency.
Okay, thank you. So I have just a couple questions about your experience running a program and a division as a division chief. But before we get into those, is there anything else you would like to share with those faculty members out there looking for DoD or other funding that we haven't talked about yet? Any words of wisdom for them?
Don't be afraid to reach out to us. Some of us can be hard to get hold of. We do travel a lot. Some of us don't like to talk on the phone. Some of us prefer email. Try different methods. Be persistent. If email's not working, see if you can find a phone number and call. Reach out and introduce yourself. And if you're going to a conference or a meeting, let them know that you might be there. If they're attending also, could you set up a quick 5 or 10 minute meeting? And that's probably all they have time for. Don't ask for an hour of their time. They have, 40 other potential PIs trying to do the same thing you are. But ask for that 5 minute face-to-face meeting. Just be persistent, I guess.
Okay, thanks. So, when you were managing a program and also a division, so even thinking at kind of like higher levels beyond the program itself, what did you think about in terms of building a portfolio, both in terms of balancing risk and the topics of the research you were supporting?
So I had a general idea of where I wanted to take the program in terms of broad objectives. Understanding, uh, s- sufficiently understand. So, as a concrete example, sufficiently understanding um, the ignition behavior of heavy hydrocarbon fuels, so you could enable fuel flexibility. Devise, engines and engine systems that could respond to whatever fuel you put in them. I used to say everything from JD to JP, from Jack Daniels to JP8 fuel. Put it in, the system would understand how it burned and adjust all the ignition and operating parameters automatically. That was a broad objective. To do that, I had to break it down to pieces. What did we need? Well, we need to understand fuels. We need to understand how to sense what the fuel was. We need to understand how these different fuels combusted in different environments, be it spark ignition or compression ignition. We needed characterization methods that could get in there. We needed spray technologies because all these fuels were liquid fuels and they're typically sprayed into combustion technologies. And we'd break it down into these different smaller pieces and then ask the questions, what is it we don't understand about those smaller pieces? And then keep breaking it down until we had those scientific questions that weren't answered. And then we would work with the PIs. Wait, you don't just wait for someone to come to you. We'd go out there, we'd make presentations. These are the type of ideas, these are the types of problems we're looking for. If you have ideas, please let us know. And we just say it in that many words when we make presentations, beginning of some of our meetings or at conferences. And then we'd go and view conferences and try and understand what the state of the field was. And sometimes we'd approach a PI after. I'd just troll school uh, school department websites. Who's new there. If I looked at their research, uh, uh, their type of research, what they're doing. LinkedIn, see what they're doing. Does it fit the type of problem? I might reach out to that PI rather than them reaching out to me and just say, "Hey, do you know about this program? Let's talk a little bit. You're working on stuff that might fit in my portfolio." So having that presence online was important the way I worked as well, because I might just be looking who's out there doing what that might fit the problem I'm trying to solve.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one last question for you. I think it's a fun one. What was your favorite part of serving as a program manager?
That's an easy one. It was going out and doing those lab tours I mentioned. So I said, after we fund a proposal, we monitor, we talk with the PI, and we go out and visit them in their lab occasionally. Visiting those labs was so much fun. I get to interact with the grad students. I get to talk directly with the PIs. I would often describe being a PM as being a professional grad student, and that was the big part of it. Was going into those labs, hanging out with the graduate students, their enthusiasm, their expertise. I often ask them to make presentations to me on their own, on their research and what they're working on, not just for the stuff I funded, but just across that lab group too, so I could understand what the other things were happening in that lab. And I'd get new ideas and talk with PI, and we keep having conversations to move it forward. But those lab visits, far and away, were the best part of the job.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Ralph. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure this is going to be very helpful to a lot of our viewers. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. Have a good day.